I live in California and it's currently raining, which is such a rarity that I figured I would do a little bit of a book recommendations video for rainy days. Okay, so I am cozied up in my room. It is raining outside, it's very gloomy and it's chilly, and it's just so much fun, especially having been born and raised and still currently living in California. Rainy days are just so much fun to me personally and to so many other Californians. So in honor of like this very fun weather that we're having, I figured I would kind of put together a list of books that I would recommend reading in a rainy setting. These are all books that I find to be really cozy and fun to read and just very chill. Some of them are going to be a little bit shorter because I figured, you know, if you are inside all day, you might want a really quick book to read. So yeah, none of them are super long by any means, which will be really nice. And yeah, they'll just be really fun books that you can just, you know, cozy up in bed and have a little blanket and a cup of coffee and just chill and enjoy these really great reads. Okay, so I think we're going to start with the physical books that I have, and to start off this list, we're going to go with In 5 Years by Rebecca Serle, which I read and loved so much, and this is a book that I know that you can read in one sitting. I will say content warnings for cancer. It is definitely a very big part of this book, so if that is something that might be uncomfortable for you to read, I would definitely stay away from this book because it is a huge part of this book. Basically, this book follows the main character Danny, and she is a young woman living in New York, and she kind of figures that she has her life kind of all worked out. She has a really great boyfriend and she wants to get married to him, and everything in her life seems meticulously planned. However, one day she ends up having this really vivid dream about this kind of like other life that she might be having in 5 years, where she's with some other guy and they have a completely different life together, and everything about her life is so different in this dream, and it's kind of unsettling, but she kind of forgets about it. And then she ends up meeting the guy from her dreams, and he is actually dating her best friend. And so this kind of sets off this really weird and kind of like dream-like narrative in this book. It's very complicated. There's a lot of complexities going on, specifically in terms of like interpersonal relationships, which I really, really love. There's definitely kind of like a love story in here, but it's certainly not a romance by any means. But it is so impactful and so just emotionally volatile that I feel like this is the perfect kind of book to really cozy up with. And you might have to bring some tissues along with you, because I know for me, when I was reading this on the plane, I cried. It really, really brought out a lot of strong emotions in me. And so yeah, this might be a lot more fun to read kind of like in the privacy of your own home because reading it on a plane when you're just like crying and reading this, it's very vulnerable, if that makes sense. And I just think it'd be so well suited for like a rainy day at home. The next book is one that is a fantasy that I feel like is really, really fun to read and very propulsive, and that is A Study in Drowning by Ava Reid. I ended up reading this, I think, a couple of years ago at this point, but it was so much fun to read. And it kind of came to me at a moment where I felt like I was kind of losing my touch with fantasy, and I hadn't really found a fantasy book that I enjoyed in a while. And so when I picked this one up, I was a little hesitant, but I ended up really, really enjoying it. And since it's kind of like a dark academia sort of fantasy, I feel like that's perfect for a rainy day. It's very gloomy and mysterious, and it definitely transported me to like this fantastical sort of Ireland type of setting. It was very rainy and very gloomy, and it was just such an immersive book, which I absolutely loved. Also, I feel like if you are a fan of Hozier, you might really, really enjoy this book. Like, this book reminded me so much of his music, and I could just like hear it in my brain playing along while I was reading this book. And basically this book follows a young woman named Effie, and she has always been really enthralled by this like book of fairy tales. And so when she ends up going to this university and studying the author that wrote that book, she finds herself kind of delving deeper into the author's life and into the stories. And then she ends up getting this really great opportunity to kind of interview the author and like shadow him. And then she finds out that she's kind of sharing this honor with another student who she doesn't really get along with, who they really butt heads. And it's just such a fun book, and I really enjoyed it. I think there's some really great blurbs on the back of this book, and Alex E. Harrow, who wrote The Once and Future Witches and quite a few other books that I have read and really enjoyed, said, "A study in drowning is everything. A dark fairy tale, a tender romance, a haunting historical mystery, and a quietly furious tribute to the people whose stories have been stolen from them. I absolutely loved it." And I think that this would be the perfect kind of fantasy book to experience on a rainy day. The next book, I believe, is the only YA book in this stack and in this like collection of titles. I can't remember if A Study in Drowning is YA. I feel like it's not, but it might be. Don't hold me to that. I'm not quite sure. However, this is definitely YA, but it's a book that I personally read when it was raining. And I just really connect this book to the rain and to like a gloomier type of weather. So that is Again by E. Lockhart. And I feel like this might be the perfect time to pick up an E. Lockhart book, especially since We Were Liars, the television series, ended up being pretty popular. And I personally feel like Again is better than We Were Liars. I don't know, that's probably a really hot take because I think that this book has kind of a low rating on Goodreads. However, I think that this book is severely misunderstood and really misrepresented, and I think that people have a certain expectation going into this book that is really not intended. However, I will say that if you read this book, I highly recommend listening to Folklore and Evermore when you read this book because it just embodies those two albums so perfectly. And this is technically a book that's set in the summertime, but it has this sort of like gloomy atmosphere that really hangs over the entire narrative of the book. So I feel like it's kind of perfect for a rainier day. This isn't necessarily a book that I would read during the summertime. I feel like it's a little too emotional for the summertime. On the back, I love this. It says, "That summer she would fall in and out of love more than once, in different ways, in different possible worlds. In every world she was consumed with the intense contradictions of her heart. Adelaide wanted to be rescued and she wanted independence. She was inclined to laziness, curiosity, and magical thinking. She was all charm and yet deeply miserable. She was a liar and she hated liars. She loved both truly and wrong-headedly." And I think that that really sums up this book so well. And just the way that this book is written is so intriguing because you kind of jump around different timelines and different possibilities within the narrative. And then you also have these like really interesting sort of pages where the format is definitely really different. And as you can see, there's just like a lot of different ways that this story is told throughout the narrative, and I really love that. And this book definitely kind of reminds me of like a YA version of In 5 Years. They're very similar books, so if you kind of want to read them together, I think that would be really interesting. But yeah, highly recommend picking this book up, and definitely listen to Folklore and Evermore when you're reading it, or after reading it, or before reading it, or whatever, depending on how you like to read books and how you like to listen to music. I know that everybody's different. Me personally, I love to listen to music when I'm reading a book. So yeah, highly recommend this book, and know that the narrative is very unique. It's very different. It's not going to be a story told in like the normal beginning, middle, and end that readers are typically used to. It's definitely going to throw you for a little bit of a loop, but go along for the ride, let it happen, and just really enjoy the novel. It's so good. The next book is one that I feel like people should absolutely pick up after they've watched Frankenstein. I loved Frankenstein. I've been like debating whether I wanted to do a video talking about the new Frankenstein movie. I'm not sure if I have like the bandwidth or if I have like the complete thoughts about this movie. in order to do a full video. So I don't know, maybe it'll end up in a vlog, maybe all my thoughts will end up somewhere in one of my vlogs, I don't know. But I feel like if you really enjoyed the movie and you want something more, you want some more like gothic horror, gothic romance, something similar, highly recommend The Death of Jane Lawrence by Caitlin Starling. I loved this book so much. I've recommended it so many times and I stand by that recommendation. It's so good. It's a gothic romance, and the thing that I really love the most about this novel is the fact that the female main character is very, very heavily coded as autistic, which I clocked immediately. I was reading this book and just kept being like, I see you. I see this, and I am picking up what the author's putting down, and it was so fantastic, and I really loved getting to see that representation in this book. And I actually did a little bit of like digging and research after I read this book, trying to figure out if the author intended it, and it seems like she did. So don't hold me to that, but I do remember finding some like blog posts or like interviews or whatever, and it seems like the author, that was like her intention. So really love that. And this book is really kind of about a marriage of convenience, and the female main character, she ends up marrying this guy, and she wants to marry him because she feels like she will be allowed to remain independent. And she ends up meeting this reclusive doctor named Augustine Lawrence, and he agrees to her proposal with only one condition: that she must never visit Lindridge Hall, his crumbling family manor outside of town. Yet on their wedding night, an accident strands her at his door in a pitch black rainstorm, and she finds him changed. Gone is the bold, courageous surgeon, and in his place is a terrified, paranoid man, one who cannot tell reality from nightmare and fears Jane is an apparition come to haunt him. By morning, Augustine is himself again, but Jane knows something is deeply wrong at Lindridge Hall, and with the man she has so hastily bound her safety to. In The Death of Jane Lawrence, Caitlin Starling crafts a new kind of gothic horror from the bones of the beloved canon, set in a dark mirror version of post-war England. This Crimson Peak inspired story assembles, then upends every expectation set in place by Shirley Jackson and Rebecca, and will leave readers shaken, desperate to begin again as soon as they are finished. And that is so true. And if you didn't know, the new Frankenstein movie was directed by Guillermo del Toro, and he also directed Crimson Peak, which I love Crimson Peak so much. It's one of my favorite movies. So if you are kind of a Guillermo del Toro stan as well, highly recommend picking this book up. It is so good and very reminiscent of that same sort of style. And the last physical book that I have to recommend to you guys is Velvet Was the Night by Silvia Moreno-Garcia. And I feel like a lot of Silvia Moreno-Garcia books would be so fun to pick up during a rainy day, similarly to like Mexican Gothic or Gods of Jade and Shadow. But I chose Velvet Was the Night mainly because this is very much inspired by film noir. And I feel like a film noir, I feel like that sort of genre is very, like, it works really well with like a rainy day and that sort of like gloomy, dark aesthetic. And I really enjoyed Velvet Was the Night. I thought it was super interesting. It's set in 1970s Mexico and is a riveting slow burn of a noir about a daydreaming secretary, a lonesome enforcer, and the mystery of a missing woman they're both desperate to find. And I think this one is really intriguing because it really drops the reader right into the middle of 1970s Mexico and all of the sort of political machinations and sort of unrest that is going on at that time in Mexico City. And it's really intriguing, and I love the way that Silvia Moreno-Garcia is able to weave together historical aspects of Mexico and put them into this narrative and make them almost sort of like a character within the narrative. And she does such a great job. It feels so strong in this novel. And I really loved all of the characters. I felt like they were so well-rounded and so well-developed, and I highly recommend picking this book up. It's so good. Very much film noir. All of the characters are so complex and definitely live within this sort of gray area. and are not always who they seem, and their intentions are not always clear, but it makes for such a propulsive and intriguing story. So highly recommend picking this one up, though I think that really any Silvia Moreno-Garcia book would be perfect for this sort of like rainy setting. Okay, so now I have 8 more books that I want to talk about, and that are ones that I don't own physically. So we're going to go through them a little bit more quickly because I did kind of take my time with the physical books, but I definitely wanted to recommend these ones because I do wish that I had them physically, but unfortunately I do not. So the first book I want to talk about is It's Different This Time by Joss Richard, which I really enjoyed. And this is an adult romance, and because we're still technically in the fall, it's still November, we're like right smack dab in the middle of fall, I felt like this would be the perfect book to recommend. And basically this book follows a young woman, and she is currently an actor living in Hollywood. Unfortunately, the pilot that she's been working on has not been picked up by any of the studios, so she kind of has to start rethinking what her goals are and what she wants to do. And then she ends up getting this kind of like random email about the brownstone that she used to live in when she was living in New York. And so she finds out that she has to go to New York and kind of sort some things out. And when she's there, she inevitably runs into the man that she was roommates with, and kind of had a bit of like a situationship a little bit. They were never like totally fully in a real relationship, but they definitely had something going on, but they really left off on kind of bad terms, and they haven't spoken to each other since. And so when she ends up running into him in New York, it's kind of awkward, and they really have to kind of figure out how to be around each other again. But what I love about this book is that you really kind of get to go back and forth between the current day and like how they're navigating this new sort of relationship, and then also you get to go into the past and see how they ended up where they are now. And I really enjoyed this book. I loved getting to see the progression of their relationship and all of the fallout from that, but I also really loved to get to see the main character and her passion for acting, and how much she was really driven and really loved it. And getting to see her kind of decide between, do I want to stay in LA and pursue acting in like on the screen, whether it's in TV or movies, or do I want to stay in New York and pursue the stage and do Broadway and stuff like that. So I found that to be really intriguing. And yeah, definitely a lot of like complex characters, a lot of like really complex relationships, and I feel like if you're a fan of Nora Ephron movies, you would absolutely love this book. It was so good. The next book is another one for my Nora Ephron fans, and that is Exit Lane by Erika Veurink. And this one is very similar to When Harry Met Sally. So if you are a When Harry Met Sally stan the way that I am, you might really enjoy this book, or you might really dislike this book, I don't know. But I did want to add this one into the list mainly because it's very short. It's a novella, so it's something that you can definitely kind of like sit down with and chill, listen to the rain come down, and it's probably only going to take you about like 4 hours to finish, depending on your reading speed. So highly recommend this one. Also, I will say another content warning for Cancer in this book. I've noticed that like twice now there's content warnings for Cancer. That's not typically something that I seek out in my books, but I think it just kind of ends up appearing because I really like books that are very emotional, and I think that for some authors the biggest emotion that they can think of is someone being diagnosed with cancer. So yeah, definitely something to look out for, something to keep in mind, especially with this book and also within 5 years. But yeah, really enjoyed this book, thought it was a lot of fun, and I have really been enjoying a lot of the 831 Stories books. The next one I want to recommend is another one I have recommended quite a few times, and that is A Woman Is No Man by Etaf. And honestly, I love any of Etaf books. I think that they're incredible, and something that she does that I really love and that not very many authors do is that she gets you invested in these characters right then and there. literally from the first page of the book, you are invested in these characters. You care about these characters. They feel real. They feel so human. And it's so impressive because I feel like so few authors do that. I feel like so many times with authors, they will kind of ease you into a narrative and ease you into connecting to the characters. But in both A Woman Is No Man and also Evil Eye, which are both by Etaf, she just immediately drops you into these narratives and you are all in. You're all in. And I even said this in my review. I said gut-wrenching and achingly beautiful. The way Etaf is able to make the audience immediately care about her characters right off the bat is so impressive. It reminds me that there's no reason to waste my time on books that give me anything less. She writes with such conviction and empathy and breathes so much life into her narratives. This book was truly so outstanding. The depth and distinctions of her female characters was a breath of fresh air, and the way she wrote this family dynamic felt both devastating but also all too familiar. Etaf, absolutely an auto read author for me now. And yeah, I feel like that really sums up my feelings about this book, is that I love the way that Etaf writes. Like, I feel like from now on, I will just pick up anything that she writes and immediately read it. And I really trust her as an author at this point. And basically, A Woman Is No Man follows the lives of everybody in this family. And you kind of get to go throughout the generations of this sort of like immediate family of like the grandparents, the parents, and then the children. And you get to see them move from occupied Palestine to New York City and get to see how they sort of deal with like the culture shocks and deal with trying to keep their family together and try to keep a lot of the traditions alive and also sort of combat certain traditions. And it's really complex, it's really intriguing, it's very, very layered. And if you love family dynamics the way that I love family dynamics, you will absolutely love this book. It was so good. It was so incredible. Like I said, the characters are just, you really, really feel for them immediately. It's so good. The next book I want to recommend is an adult romance, and that is Not in My Book by Katie Holt. Also, I've noticed that most of these books are set in New York. A lot of them are, and I feel like for me as a Californian, if I'm thinking of like gloomy weather, I'm thinking of rain, I'm thinking of New York. So that might be why there's so many books that are set in New York in this list. But this one, like I said, also set in New York, and it follows these two students who are doing a creative writing course, and they have really disliked each other for a while. The female main character, she mainly writes romance, and then the male main character mainly writes literary fiction, and so they have always kind of butted heads and have not really gotten along. However, it sort of gets to this boiling point where their professor is like, I've had enough of you guys arguing, I've had enough of you guys kind of going at each other's throats. I want you guys to work on this project together and get along and figure out how to sort of combine literary fiction with romance. And I absolutely loved that premise, and I was so excited to read this book, and it defied all of my expectations. It was so good and so emotional. And I'd seen this book kind of compared to Beach Read by Emily Henry, which is another book that I absolutely love. However, I feel like they're not all that similar, honestly. Like, I get that there's sort of like that, oh, she writes this type of book, he writes this type of book, and they're sort of like comparing notes and working together. But that's sort of where the comparisons and like similarities end, because these are two very, very different books, like vastly different. And something that I loved about this book is that it has Latina representation, which I absolutely love, obviously, and I felt like that was really important in this book, and I loved getting to see that representation within this sort of narrative. So highly recommend Not in My Book. It was so much fun. The next one I have to recommend is a nonfiction book, and that is Black in Blues: How a Color Tells the Story of My People by Imani. And I felt like a nonfiction book specifically about the color blue would be kind of perfect for a rainy day because, you know, rain, water is blue. And I felt like that would be kind of perfect. It really works. And I read this book earlier this year and I absolutely loved it. It was so good. In my review, I said, this was such an incredibly refreshing and engaging work of nonfiction. The way Imani uses her lush prose to interrogate the histories of both subjugation and prosperity of the Black experience through the lens of the color blue was phenomenal. There was so much packed into this book, and I feel like it's a perfect addition to the library of books dedicated to exploring Black history, culture, and experience. Blue represents such a range of emotions and experiences, and Perry is able to expertly explore those themes through historical anecdotes ranging from ones familiar to me and others that were completely new. If you're interested in engaging with history through the lens of art, music, and expression, I highly recommend checking this book out. And yeah, I think that sums it all up. This is a really, really interesting exploration of the way that blue has a relationship with the Black experience, and highly recommend this book. It was so good. Such a great book to pick up on a rainy day. The next book is one that I actually have recommended very recently, and that is We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson, and I feel like there's not much more to be said. This book is so good. It's very short, and it just like has that sort of spooky kind of quality that is perfect for a gloomy day. And if you know Shirley Jackson, you probably know her from The Lottery, and that short story is very scary in a very interesting kind of way, kind of like a Twilight Zone-esque sort of way. And it's very, very similar to the same sort of feeling that you get in We Have Always Lived in the Castle. So highly recommend it. And I also think it's kind of the perfect book for this moment of like how we other people, how we treat people that we view as an other. So yeah, highly recommend this book, and honestly anything by Shirley Jackson. The second to last book I want to talk about is We Do What We Do in the Dark by Michelle Hart. And this is also another book that is set in New York, but this time it's set on Long Island, and it explores this sort of life-changing, life-altering, perspective-shifting relationship between a student and a professor at this Long Island university. I want to say that it's set at Long Island University, LIU, because when I was reading this book, it just felt so reminiscent, or at least like it's inspired by that campus, because I've been on that campus. It's beautiful, but it felt very reminiscent to LIU. In my review, I said, really enjoyed the quiet depth of this young woman exploring her sexuality and her uneven and dizzying affair with a professor at her college. It's short, but I never felt like the narrative was rushed or shortchanged. It was interesting to peel back the layers of this character and her uneasy feelings about owning her sexuality. And yeah, I really, really enjoyed this. I thought it was a really interesting exploration on kind of like dealing with figuring out your sexuality. And yeah, just a really, really great literary fiction pick. And like I said, it's short, so perfect for kind of reading it in one sitting. And the very last book I want to talk about is You Again by Kate Goldbeck. This is an adult romance, and one that I've seen recommended so many times, but for a very, very good reason. And if you are fans of When Harry Met Sally, or really any sort of Nora Ephron movie, I highly recommend You Again. It is so good. It really spans this entire friendship, and you kind of get to see these two people come in and out of each other's lives throughout many years, and it's just so beautiful. It has such a breadth of this story of like just spanning so many years, and it's also such a funny book. I feel like it's a book that will keep you reading and keep you interested, and you're not going to want to put it down. It is a little bit on the longer side, I'm pretty sure. However, it's going to feel like it's very short. It's going to feel so fast and so funny and just very quick-witted. and I really loved this book. I love the way it was written. I love these two characters. It's a narrative that has really stuck with me, and it's become kind of a book that I will use as sort of a yardstick, as sort of a measurement of like how good a romance book is. It's become one of those books. So, and in my review I said, as a When Harry Met Sally fan and certified Raylo, this was perfect for me, because yes, it is sort of inspired by Raylo. I have to say that. I have to say it because some people are going to be like, I had no idea. Now they're going to see this video and you can't say that you had no idea. So yeah, I really enjoyed this book. I thought it was fantastic and definitely perfect for like a fall rainy kind of day. Okay, so that was a lot of books that I talked about. I didn't really intend to do more than 10 books because it can kind of be a lot of talking, but I'm glad that I was able to give you guys so many recommendations. I stand by every single one of them. They're such great books, and please let me know if you pick any of them up and if you enjoy them. I want to hear your guys' thoughts. If you have picked up any of these books in the past and you enjoyed them, definitely want to hear your thoughts as well. But yeah, I mean, it's just like such a cozy rainy day. I knew I had to film this video and I'm so excited to give it to you guys. So I hope you all enjoyed it, and if you did, go ahead and give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Also go ahead and follow me on Instagram, Twitter, Threads, Goodreads, Storygraph, TikTok. All of the links and more are down below, and I will see you all in my next video. Bye!